fellow survivors. It is March 22nd, 2020. This is class session number 12 of the Maccabees class that I'm teaching at Adams Boulevard Church of Christ. It is actually session number 2 of the COVID-19 edition, which means instead of teaching at the class building like I normally would, I'm once again recording this in my COVID-19 bunker. And that's enough of my face. Let's move on. I think this class will be posted on YouTube and linked from the church Facebook page. So in case you don't know about the class web page, here it is. All previous class sessions can be found there except for class session number 9, which I forgot to record. Okay, we ended class session number 11 with the sad but courageous death of Judas Maccabeus, dying while leading his massively outnumbered forces in a battle against the Seleucid army led by the military governor Bacchides. He had been dispatched by the Seleucid king Demetrius to avenge general and elephantarch Nicanor, who had been defeated and killed by Judas's forces. So Judas is now dead, but the Jewish resistance against the Seleucid rule goes on. The people need a new leader, so they turn to Judas's brother, Jonathan, and ask him to be their leader. It's not explained in 1 Maccabees why they did not ask Judas's older brother, Simon, to do this, but I think it's significant that there's not any hereditary succession here. That would come about soon enough. Nor did Jonathan ask for this position, nor did he seize it like you might expect. Rather, he takes on leadership in a military sense, much like one of the Old Testament judges. It's as though he's raised up to be Israel's deliverer, and the people themselves then validate that selection. So it should be no surprise that the author of 1 Maccabees uses language right out of the book of Judges to describe the beginning of Jonathan's service as leader when peace arrives following a series of military victories by Jonathan over Bacchides. And we find this in 1 Maccabees chapter 9, verse 73. Then the sword ceased from Israel. Jonathan settled in Michmash. He began to judge the people, and he eliminated the renegades from Israel. Well, the reference to Michmash, that's an additional Old Testament significance, and that is because Michmash is where Saul first established his kingdom in 1 Samuel. And that's in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 2. Now Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel, of which 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, while 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah of Benjamin. But he sent away the rest of the people, each to his tent. So we see in this one verse in 1 Maccabees, we have Old Testament language being echoed two different ways. It's talking about Jonathan judging as though he is one of the Old Testament judges, and it's also making note of the fact that he starts out his rule from Michmash, which is where the first Jewish king, King Saul, started. So he's now ruling. There's a time of peace, but you probably will not be surprised to learn that the peace did not last. There are still Seleucid fortresses throughout Judea, and there would be many more Seleucid battles to fight. But before getting into that, I want to comment just a moment on what kind of leader Jonathan was. You might assume that lightning is not going to strike twice, so Jonathan can't possibly live up to the example set by his brother Judas. But in fact, Jonathan proves to be an exceptional leader. He was an effective military leader on the battlefield, but more importantly, he was a shrewd political leader, which is precisely what the Jews needed at this point in the revolt. Where Jonathan really excelled was playing one contender for the Seleucid throne against another. He always seemed to know which way to jump, who to ally himself with. Now you'll recall that it was Demetrius who was on the throne when Jonathan took over from his brother Judas. So the first few military victories under the leadership of Jonathan were against Demetrius's army. But soon enough, Demetrius would make a switch and decide to make an ally out of Jonathan, and that's because a new contender for the throne arrives on the scene. His name is Alexander Balis, claiming to be another son of Antiochus IV, which is almost certainly not true. He managed to raise an army of his own to challenge Demetrius, and he got support from Rome, since Rome did not like Demetrius, who had been a hostage of Rome but had escaped. Plus, Rome just doesn't like anybody who's effective as ruler of a rival empire. Well, as soon as Alexander Balis appears with this strong force, Demetrius decides that he needs as many allies as he can get. He needs somebody strong who will support him in the Judea area of the empire, and that would be Jonathan. So Demetrius tries to find a way to bring Jonathan over to his side. He initially even offers to give him authority over the Seleucid army in Jerusalem, and Jonathan accepts this offer. So Jonathan goes from fighting Demetrius's army to being in control of that army. Well, Alexander Balis, he too realizes that there's benefit in having Jonathan as an ally, so he tries to one-up Demetrius. And really, Alexander and Demetrius, they get into this sort of bidding war to see who can win over Jonathan. And what Alexander's offer is that if you'll come over to my side, not only can you continue to be the military ruler of Jerusalem, but I will also recognize you as high priest at the temple. Well, Jonathan accepts this offer, so he switches from supporting Demetrius to supporting Alexander Balis. And the offer that Alexander makes to Jonathan is in 1 Maccabees chapter 10. He actually writes a letter to Jonathan, and in the letter he says, "We have therefore appointed you today to be high priest of your nation. You are to be called the king's friend, and you are to look after our interests and preserve friendship with us." He also sent him a purple robe and a crown of gold. Jonathan put on the sacred vestments in the 7th month of the 160th year at the Feast of Booths, and he gathered an army and procured many weapons. Well, as we've seen, Jonathan was already the supreme military and political leader in Jerusalem. Well, now he's also going to be the supreme religious ruler by being high priest at the temple. Now, the priesthood had been vacant for several years since the death of Alchemist, and if you'll recall, he was the last evil priest contender for the position of high priest in Jerusalem, that when Demetrius had first escaped from Rome, raised an army, and made it to the lands of the Seleucid Empire, Alchemist had gone to him and said, "Hey, you need to make me high priest in Jerusalem. If you do, I will be loyal to you." And Demetrius accepted this offer and sent Bacchides leading an army to take Jerusalem and place Alchemist as the high priest. And Alchemist did serve as high priest for a time. What we didn't get into is that eventually he died, seized by paralysis, fell over dead. The writer of 1 Maccabees indicates that's God's divine judgment on Alchemist. But after that, the position of high priest was vacant until this point in our story, when Jonathan becomes the high priest. Well, this is problematic for a couple of reasons. You might recall from earlier classes, we talked about the Maccabees family being a priestly family. They're of the tribe of Levi, so they could serve in the temple, but they don't have the right bloodline to be high priest. So Jonathan, for that reason alone, really shouldn't have accepted this offer to be high priest. But also, since he was already the supreme political leader, he shouldn't also take on the role of being priest. I mean, the Old Testament model is pretty clear. You don't combine these roles of king and priest. And the Jewish religious leaders at this time, they know this, so they react somewhat to this decision by Jonathan to try to be both high priest and political leader. And this reaction, it might actually be what sparked the beginning of the sect at Qumran, which we know as the Essenes during the New Testament era. And it also could explain the building of a rival temple by Onias IV in Egypt. And I'm going to get off on a little bit of a tangent at this point, but I think this is a fascinating story that I wasn't aware of before I decided to teach this class on Maccabees. And you probably aren't aware of it either. There was another temple in Egypt, and this temple, it was built by Onias IV, and let me explain a little bit about who he is. You'll recall that Onias III, he was the last legitimate high priest who was respected by the people. He was kicked out by his brother Jason, who wanted the support of the Seleucid king, and he was in favor of the Hellenization movement that was going on. Jason was then kicked out by an even more evil priest, Menelaus, and there's really no legitimate high priest after that. Well, at this point in our story, this guy, Onias IV, who some believe was the son of Onias III, he leads a group of pious Jews who leave Jerusalem and go down into Egypt. Now, the ruler of Egypt welcomes them because the empire in Egypt is a rival empire to the Seleucids. So he's happy to take in anybody who is an enemy of the Seleucids. So Onias IV and his people settle at Leontopolis. They build another temple. Onias IV is high priest of this temple. There's a priesthood. There's an altar with daily sacrifices. So they're doing everything just like what should be happening at the temple in Jerusalem. And in fact, Onias, he saw this as a fulfillment of Isaiah's oracle in Isaiah chapter 19. And that's Isaiah 19 verses 19 through 22. In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord near its border. So it will become a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. For they will cry to the Lord because of oppressors, and he will send them a Savior and a champion, and he will deliver them. Thus the Lord will make himself known to Egypt, and the Egyptians will know the Lord in that day. They will even worship with sacrifice and offering, and will make a vow to the Lord and perform it. The Lord will strike Egypt, striking but healing, so they will return to the Lord, and he will respond to them, and he will heal them. Well, this Jewish community at Leontopolis would become so well established that that area would become known as Land of Onias, after Onias IV, the high priest at the temple. And this temple would continue to function for another century, all the way up to New Testament era. So that means that during the time of Jesus, when he's in the temple in Jerusalem, cleansing the temple, there's another temple down in Egypt where has its own priesthood. Sacrifices are being offered on a daily basis, which really surprised me. I didn't know this part of the story when I started teaching Maccabees class. I also learned that Jewish rabbis in the first century and really all the way up to today still don't know how to treat this temple in Jerusalem. For the most part, they just treat it like a synagogue, and they respect what was going on there. They respect Onias IV, although they can't accept the fact that he was offering sacrifice there, because only the temple in Jerusalem is where sacrifices should be offered. But in any event, this alternative Jewish temple continued to exist from this time, which would be around 160 BC, all the way up through the time of Jesus, and in fact would continue to function until 70 AD, which is when the Romans came in, sacked Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. Well, at the same time, they sent forces into Leontopolis and destroyed that temple for the same reason. They want to suppress any kind of bubble that might rise up among the Jews to rebel against the Roman Empire. Okay, so ending that tangent, getting back to this rivalry between Demetrius and Alexander, the bidding war for Jonathan's loyalty, it continues. So Demetrius comes back and makes his own offer to Jonathan, and in this letter he addresses it to, quote, the Jewish nation. So that's a pretty big development right there. This is the first time that we have a Seleucid king recognizing the Jews as their own nation. And it goes on to offer exemptions from all kinds of taxes. It recognizes Jerusalem as a holy city. It promises freedom to Jewish prisoners. There's provisions for Jewish soldiers to serve in Demetrius's army. He promises annexation of some neighboring territories that will be added to this Jewish nation. He offers subsidies for Jerusalem and the temple, and he offers the right of asylum in Jerusalem and promises funds to rebuild Jerusalem. Well, all this was just too much to be believed by the Jews and by Jonathan, so he doesn't accept this offer. They stick with Alexander's offer. So Jonathan ends up fighting along with Alexander's forces against Demetrius, and Demetrius is defeated. And First Maccabees records that Demetrius fell that day, suggesting that Demetrius was killed in battle. So this leaves Alexander as the king of the Seleucid Empire. So it looks like Jonathan chose wisely between the two contenders for the Seleucid throne. Alexander ends up marrying Cleopatra of Egypt, not that Cleopatra, different Cleopatra. He meets her father in Ptolemais for this coming together of the two empires. And at that meeting of these two kings, Jonathan is also present. He comes there and offers gifts to both kings, and Jonathan is placed on a throne of his own right next to Alexander, which this is really remarkable. Just think about how far we've come in this story. Just a couple of decades earlier, we have Judas leading a band of probably less than 50 men in the hill country around Modain, and they're doing guerrilla style attacks on the Seleucid army. And now here we are with his brother his brother Jonathan, seated on a throne right next to the king of this same Seleucid Empire. Well, at this point in our story, I'm going to hit the fast forward button. Really what happens after this is a lot more of the same. There's more shifting alliances, more people contending for the throne of the Seleucid Empire, and a whole bunch more battles. And it gets kind of monotonous. I've already hit you with a lot of names that you're not going to remember, and there's going to be a few more, but I'm going to move through them pretty quickly so we can get to something that I think is really significant for us. But I do want to cover the basic facts so that you'll understand the story that explains how we get from that initial revolt in Modain to the point where John Hyrcanus is sitting on the throne of a new Jewish nation. Okay, the next contender for the Seleucid throne is Demetrius II. He's the son of Demetrius, who we just learned about fell in battle while fighting Alexander Balis. Well, Demetrius II, he was only 14 at this point, but he's able to raise his own army, and he challenges Alexander, seeking vengeance for the death of his father. Well, Jonathan, he remains loyal to Alexander in this fighting, and it's Apollonius, a military governor, who sides with Demetrius, who really goes up against Jonathan on the battlefield. And Apollonius taunts Jonathan into leaving Jerusalem, coming out with his forces into the open plains, where Apollonius thought he would have the advantage. But in fact, Jonathan and his brother Simon, leading the Jewish army, is able to defeat Apollonius. Apollonius's men, they flee to a pagan temple, the temple of Dagon, and there Jonathan surrounds him and burns the temple, kills everyone. So Apollonius's forces completely wiped out. Jonathan is promoted again to the position of king's kinsman, and is given even more territory, including the Philistine stronghold of Ekron. At this point, Ptolemy, the ruler of Egypt, goes to war against Alexander Balis, and if you'll recall, Alexander Balis is now the son-in-law of the king of Egypt. So it's the father-in-law versus son-in-law in this war, and they end up killing each other off. And this leaves Demetrius II, as king by default of the Seleucid Empire in 145 BC. Well, at this point, Jonathan, he orders another siege of the citadel. And if you'll recall, the citadel is the Seleucid fortress that's built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, right next to the temple, that even though the Maccabees has had control of Jerusalem off and on for a couple of decades now, somehow the Seleucids, during all this time, remain in control of the citadel. And Jonathan's had enough. He decides this is the time to make a move on the citadel and wipe it out once and for all. This angers Demetrius II. After all, he's king of the Seleucid Empire. That's a Seleucid fortress, the citadel. So he orders Jonathan to appear for a meeting to explain himself, why he's doing this. Well, Jonathan sweet talks Demetrius II, offers him a lump sum payment in exchange for granting exemption from taxes to Jerusalem, and it actually works. Demetrius goes along with this. Demetrius II confirms Jonathan as high priest, and he issues a letter, quote, to the Jewish nation once again. And in this letter, it exempts this Jewish nation from taxes, and he orders this letter to be posted on the Holy Mountain, meaning the Temple Mount. Well, after this, again, I'm really hitting the fast forward button here. There's a lot more detail in 1 Maccabees if you want to read it. But what happens, there's more intrigues, this time using Antiochus the Sixth, who is the son of Alexander Balis. Demetrius II angers the native soldiers by dismissing them and relying primarily on foreign mercenaries. Others take advantage by bringing in young Antiochus VI as a rival. And here's a coin from that period. You can see this is the image of Antiochus VI. I kind of like this. You can see he's just a young boy, doesn't look that fearsome. He is really just being used by others who want to take out Demetrius II. As part of a coup, the elephants, I always love talking about the elephants. As a coup, part of the elephants in Antioch are captured, And this is really like capturing all the heavy artillery. So whoever has the control of the elephants really has control of Antioch. So Demetrius II, he falls, and Antiochus VI, this boy, he's never officially coronated, but he's held up as though he's the new king by General Diodotus Tryphon, which literally means the luxurious one. So this general, using Antiochus VI, is really the actual ruler over the Seleucid Empire. And there's coined by Diodotus Trypho. Well, here Jonathan once again has to make a choice who he's going to support. He wisely supports Antiochus VI just at the right moment. He goes around recruiting soldiers to fight with him against Demetrius II. And at Gaza and Bet Zur, the Jewish people there refuse him. They don't want to go along with Jonathan's fight against Demetrius II. So because they reject him, Jonathan attacks the towns, captures hostages, and sends them to Jerusalem. So this is a little bit troubling aspect of the story of the Maccabees. Once again, if I were going to make a movie about this, I think I'd leave out this part. It doesn't make Jonathan look very, very well. He's now battling his own people. I mean, these are Jewish towns that Jonathan is attacking simply because they don't want to provide soldiers in his battle against Demetrius II. But in any event, he's successful in joining with Antiochus VI and the general Diodotus Tryphon, and Demetrius II is defeated, and Jonathan's position is confirmed once again. And we see this in 1 Maccabees chapter 11, verses 57 through 59. Then young Antiochus wrote to Jonathan, I confirm you in the high priesthood and appoint you ruler over the 4 districts and to be one of the king's friends. He also sent him gold dishes and a table service, gave him the right to drink from gold cups, to dress in royal purple, and to wear a gold buckle. And you can be certain that I did some research here trying to find what the gold buckle would have looked like. I couldn't find any illustration, much less a photo, but I'm imagining the gold buckle looking something like an IFR rodeo championship buckle. Whatever it was, this is something that the king of the Seleucid Empire sent to Jonathan to gain his favor and to affirm his leadership position. Also, Jonathan's brother Simon, he's made governor of the coastal area from Lebanon to Egypt. So the area controlled by the Maccabees is getting significantly bigger. Okay, the next thing that happens in our story is Jonathan seeks to strengthen his position by making alliances with Rome and Sparta. What he does is he sends representatives to Rome who spoke in the Senate chamber in Rome requesting that the earlier alliance be renewed. You'll remember that Jonathan's brother Judas had done this as well. He had made an alliance, at least on paper, with Rome. Nothing ever came of it. Rome never sent any soldiers. Nothing was really done. But at this point, Jonathan thinks it'd be a good idea to renew that alliance, or at least affirm it. So that was the purpose of this delegation that went and spoke in the Senate chamber in Rome. Jonathan also sent a letter to Sparta seeking friendship, and he enclosed a copy of a letter that Arius, the leader of Sparta, had sent to the high priest Onias. in approximately 309 BC. So this is a different Onias than the one that I talked about earlier. Remember, it's Onias III who was the last really legitimate high priest in Jerusalem, who was respected by the Jewish people. But that was around 170 BC. This Onias is from 309 BC, so this is centuries earlier. And in this letter, Arius claims that the Jews and the Spartans are of the family of Abraham. So this is really bizarre. This is, again, something I'd never heard of before, that the Spartans somehow think that they are children of Abraham. And so in this letter that was written around 309 BC, the Spartans think that they can establish some sort of friendship with the Jews by pointing out that we have this connection. And actually, here's the text of the letter written from Sparta to Onias the high priest in 309 BC. Arius, king of Spartans, sends greetings to Onias the high priest. A document has been found stating that the Spartans and the Jews are brothers and that they are of the family of Abraham. Now that we have learned this, kindly write to us about your welfare. We, for our part, declare to you that your animals and your possessions are ours, and ours are yours. We have therefore given orders that you should be told of this. Well, this is really strange. It's not clear what prompted this. It doesn't appear that Sparta was seeking any kind of formal military alliance. Based on the letter, they just wanted to establish friendly relations with the Jews. Isn't that sweet? As the basis for this friendship, Arius, king of Sparta, is telling the Jews, look, we found this document that says that we and you are of the family of Abraham. We're brothers. We don't know what this document was that was presented. It's almost certainly fraudulent, but in any event, this is Sparta's argument for why Sparta and Jews should be friendly with one another. And so Jonathan, he's referencing back to this letter as a reason why Sparta and the Jews should be friends. It's a little bit awkward because Onias never did respond to this letter. He just blew it off. Apparently he didn't take much stock in whatever the document this was that said that the Jews and the Spartans are children of Abraham. Onias just ignored it. But now Jonathan, nonetheless, is trying to argue that because this letter was sent back in 309 BC, for the same reason now we should be friends. And nothing comes of this. Neither this or the alliance made with Rome. I mean, Rome doesn't send soldiers, Sparta doesn't send soldiers, but these alliances are made, at least on paper. Okay, moving on. What happens? There's more fighting between Demetrius II's forces and Jonathan and Simon leading the Jewish army. And at some point, the general Trypho, who is the real ruler of the Seleucid Empire at this point, using Antiochus VI, the boy, as a figurehead, he gathers an army to fight Jonathan, but he's surprised when Jonathan manages to assemble an army of 40,000. He didn't think that Jonathan could assemble a force that big. So Trypho immediately changes tactics. He tells Jonathan he never wanted to fight, that he had peaceful intentions. In fact, Trypho says, I want to honor you, and I want to give you even more territories. Well, Jonathan, who's been pretty shrewd up to this point, for whatever reason, he falls for this, and he agrees to travel with Trypho to this other town that Trypho says he's going to deliver over to him. And Jonathan sends away the bulk of his army, keeps only 1,000 men with him, and then when he gets to this other town, he goes inside the main city gate. Trypho's men shut the doors behind him, traps Jonathan. Most of the 1,000 men are outside the gate. They're slaughtered, and Trypho captures Jonathan. Well, Trypho planned on wiping out the rest of the full Jewish army, but they make it back to Judea. Well, at this point, with Jonathan captured, Simon, he's the only Maccabee brother left. So he becomes the new leader of the Jewish people. Trypho, he confronts Simon with an army, and with Jonathan as a hostage. He demands a ransom of money to be paid by Simon, and also demands that 2 of Jonathan's sons be sent to him, and that when he gets the sons and the money, Trypho supposedly is going to release Jonathan. Well, Simon doesn't necessarily believe this, but he's kind of in a tough spot because the Jewish people, they really revere Jonathan, and so they expect Simon to do whatever it takes to get the release of Jonathan. Simon ends up sending 2 of Jonathan's sons as requested, sends the money, but then Trypho doesn't follow through. He ends up killing Jonathan anyway, and presumably he also killed Jonathan's sons. But Simon does get Jonathan's body, and he takes it to the family tomb in Moda'in. You'll remember that's where Judas was buried as well when he fell in battle. And now I'm going to read 1 Maccabees chapter 13, verses 25 through 30, that describes what happens next. Simon sent for the remains of his brother Jonathan and buried him in Moda'in, the city of his ancestors. All Israel bewailed him with solemn lamentation, mourning over him for many days. Then Simon erected over the tomb of his father and his brothers a monument of stones, polished front and back and raised high enough to be seen at a distance. He set up 7 pyramids facing one another for his father and his mother and his 4 brothers. For the pyramids he devised a setting of massive columns, which he adorned with suits of armor as a perpetual memorial, and next to the armor-carved ships, which could be seen by all who sailed the sea. This tomb, which he built at Moda'in, is there to the present day. The reason why I thought it was important to read these details about the tomb of Jonathan is because it sounds so very Hellenistic. Isn't that unusual, unexpected, that this is the kind of tomb that Simon would design for his family? I mean, remember, up till now, the whole revolt was really a movement against Hellenism. The Maccabees, they're holding to the old covenant. They're traditional Jews who resist these Hellenistic impulses of the Seleucid Empire, and yet when they get to the point of creating this family tomb, it's got pyramids, suits of armor, sculptures of ships that can be seen from miles away. This sounds more like something that Alexander the Great would want for his tomb rather than what an Old Testament Jewish leader would want. It doesn't sound like the kind of tomb that we would read about in the Old Testament. It sounds very Hellenistic. So this is significant because we see here, even within this movement of the Maccabees to preserve the Jewishness of their people, we still have these 4 Hellenistic forces. They're being tugged in this direction, and this force would continue all the way up to the 1st century, and so we see the same sort of thing going on within the 1st century church. And when we get to next week's class, I hope we'll talk a little bit more about that. But anyway, this is probably a good place to end session number 12 with the death and burial of Jonathan. At this point, Simon is the only Maccabee brother left. All the others have died at the hands of these Seleucid enemies, one way or another, either in battle or by being executed. So Simon is now the ruler over this nascent Jewish nation, and not surprisingly, there is still more battles to come and more shifting alliances, and we'll get into that next week and hopefully finish up. One thing that I plan on doing, though, I'm going to have a bonus archaeology session. I thought that'd be appropriate since I did one series of class sessions a few years ago on Old Testament archaeology, and then I followed that up with a series of class sessions on New Testament archaeology. So why not also do at least one bonus class that would focus on archaeology relating to the story of the Maccabees. And in fact, I've already found several stories, archaeological stories in the news that relates to some of the things that we've talked about in this class. So if you're up for it, when we finish this class, you can go to the class webpage, and I'll post there an additional class that just focuses on archaeological matters. Anyway, that's where we're going to finish this week. I'll see you in a week for Maccabees class session number 13.